Please take us through that.
It was one of the few stories that had not come from a viewer. It came from a journalist friend of mine, Eve Pollard, who told me the story that Nicky Winton and his wife had been decluttering and were up in the loft and found this briefcase with an album in it, and his wife said, "What's this?" And he explained that it contained the pictures, the documents belonging to children, that mainly Jewish children, that had to be rescued by him and a tiny team in Prague just before the Nazis came in. And his wife immediately said, "But they won't know anything about their own backgrounds. If you brought them to England to be fostered by families in Britain, they won't know anything about their own families. These may be the only mementos of the life they'd had in Prague." So he was looking for ways of reuniting those children with their own documents. And immediately we saw the album, I rang him up and congratulated him on saving more than 650 children. And he said, "Not enough." And he sounded so bleak and so sad about that, and that's what made me feel, well, we've got to prove to this man that his achievement has been extraordinary.
And Peter Bazalgette, what do you remember about that reveal moment?
I think it was the single most extraordinary, brilliant and moving piece of television in probably British television history. It was an extraordinary coup to get people to stand up around him. And a very small coda, Kirsty. Many years later I was involved with the Holocaust Memorial Foundation, and the family of Nicholas Winton contacted me when he died, aged 104. So could they get somewhere nice and big to hold a memorial service in central London? And at that service they did the same thing, but it was the children and the grandchildren who stood up. And that underlined how people like Nicholas Winton defeated Hitler, because when you see the families and their children and their grandchildren, in some cases their great-grandchildren, you realise just how important his work was and how he defeated Nazism.
Adrian Mills, you want to come in there?
I don't think in my life I've ever been in a studio where the atmosphere was so totally and utterly electric. It was extraordinary. And the way Esther wrote the script of He Said, She Said, I was lucky enough to be given the part of Nicholas Winton and reading his words. And look at it on YouTube. It has now been viewed over 41 million times. And on the day, I get emotional at all sorts of things. I remember getting emotional at the actual show, and no matter how many times I see that, it makes me cry every time I see it, because he was such a humble, charming, wonderful, courageous man.
In 1991, That's Life revealed disturbing allegations of sexual abuse at the private boys' boarding school, Crookham Court in Berkshire. Richard Wolfe worked on the story.
A boy wrote to Esther saying he'd been abused at school and he had told the police but nothing had happened, and he said, "I've just discovered it's happening to my younger brother again, the same thing." At that time, social services couldn't go into a private boarding school without giving details of asking for an appointment. And it was harrowing and awful and distressing. As a result of the broadcast that we did, there was a court case, the 3 teachers were jailed, and the law got changed.
But by the early 1990s, That's Life began to face stiff competition from more dramatic consumer programs, such as ITV's Cook Report. Those programs invariably ended with presenter Roger Cook confronting the villains.
Mr. Grunwell, tell us about your car stealing activities.
What?
Your car stealing activities.
Me?
You. And you did steal it. We actually filmed you doing it.
Would you like your loft converted or some tarmac on your drive?
The final edition, That's Life All Over, was broadcast on Sunday the 19th of June 1994. Editor Briar Scudamore had worked on the show for over 15 years.
We had been dropping audiences at channels that were coming up, but I think people felt it was getting old-fashioned. Nowadays, it would be almost impossible to bring it back as well. It's such a difficult programme to make.
the hundreds of thousands of viewers who wrote to us over
As
the years.
Esther was delivering her final lines to camera, there was a surprise in store.
We're going to end tonight the way we...
No, you're not. No, you're not going to end that way at all. Something you don't know anything about.
David Frost introduced a series of tributes, including one from the then Prime Minister, John Major. But one in particular stood out.
Hi Esther, do you remember me? I'm Matthew Whitaker, and I was at Cambridge when you were there with Ben Hardwick. I was 11 years old at the time and dying of liver. It's after you told about Ben's story of needing a transplant on That's Life. I had my transplant. I'd just like to thank you, Esther, for the way you drew attention to the desperate shortage of organs needed for transplantation.
I'm thinking I don't deserve any of that. I'm thinking that I've had the honour and privilege of standing in this studio just providing a link between the wonderful people who wrote to us because they wanted to help and the amazing people who watched and were able to help. We began all those years ago where we're going to end, with the Handwell Brass Band to play us away from us all here in the studio. Good night.
Former producer Richard Wolfe.
All we need to do is go to the very last episode, and there's a wonderful shot when Esther finally says goodnight, and there are the sullen, guilty faces of some of Britain's top broadcasting bosses, thinking, what the hell have we just done?
But there was a postscript. In 2024, Sir Nicholas Winton's story, including his famous appearances on That's Life, was made into a film starring Sir Anthony Hopkins, One Life.
I'm starting, sir. I have to finish it.
We cannot let these people down.
Can I ask, is there anyone in the audience tonight who owes their life to Nicholas Winton?
Let's talk about the Crookham Court case. The idea then that there was this plea for help about sexual abuse in a school, and now of course we have more recently heard a lot about that.
I was the person who was chosen to read out the very first letter on the programme, I think, from a child that had been abused. And I remember Esther saying, please contact this programme if this is happening to you. And we were absolutely inundated to an extent that none of us could ever have believed. And Richard Wolfe, who was the researcher with the Crookham Court case, could you imagine the legal nightmare? The lawyers were watching this programme and going through it with a fine-tooth comb. But we persevered because we knew and we believed the children that were at the heart of the story. And if you look at how things have progressed from there, look at how unbelievable Childline and the setting up of that organisation has become. And not just Childline UK, that organisation has been copied around the world and saved the lives of thousands of children.
Esther Ranson, can you remember your exact feelings when you were told that the show was going to be cancelled?
Yes, we'd been going 21 years, and I had begun to hear myself say, when someone read out a letter, yeah, well, the last time we did that story, we did this, that, or the other. And I became aware that although the stories were as fresh as ever, and our viewers were as fresh as ever, maybe I wasn't as fresh as ever. So when I was summoned by my head of department, Mark Thompson, and also by the controller of BBC One, Alan Yentov, to go and see them both in Alan's office, I had an inkling what was going on, because I had lunch in some smart restaurant that I didn't normally go to near Television Centre, and Mark Thompson was there having lunch with Anne Robinson, and I was delighted to see them, and they were not delighted to see me. Lunch, watching their expressions, and I thought, right, something's up. So when I was summoned to Alan Yentov's office, and Alan broke the news to me, bless his heart, he broke the news to me that this was the final series, I said to him, look, I wouldn't want your job. Someone has got to tell a programme when they've had enough, when the time has come to stop. Then Mark Thompson said to me, Esther, will you claim it was your decision? And I said to Mark Thompson, well, I can't do that, because then the follow-up question would be, well, why do you want to stop this show, which, you know, is causing so much pleasure and happiness and having such achievements? And I haven't got an answer. The only answer is that you've axed me. And then I think I got into cahoots with one of our press officers, and we did a photo shoot with me sitting in a rubbish bin with a headline saying, you know, BBC dumps Esther, and me smiling broadly.
So, Peter Bazalgette, could a programme like That's Life be commissioned today, do you think?
I don't think the precise format. Studios for factual entertainment programmes are not fashionable at the moment. Everything's done on video, edited, and much, much faster. So it's the format that I don't think could get repeated today. But the content, I think it's as fresh as ever, personally.
I just wanted to say, Peter referred to the post office scandal, and I am reading the book for the second time at the moment. It's an appalling read, and I've heard it on the radio before that. And I wondered if That's Life had still been going, could that have been curtailed? I just think it's the kind of show that would have nipped it in the bud, and, you know, because it's appalling, as you know.
Jane Nelson-Dew, for you, what did That's Life give you?
Of my career. I learned so much. I learned at every level. I learned how to be a journalist, and you were not allowed to make mistakes. I must just quickly say that this film, One Life, that's just been released about Sir Nicholas Winton, the director was approached to ask, a very well-known director called James Hawes was asked if he could direct it, and he said yes, he'd very much like to. And it was only after they had appointed him that they discovered that he had in fact worked for a whole year on That's Life. So wow. The extraordinary connection came there.
I was going to say that I used to watch the show, obviously, when I left, after I left, and the Nicholas Winton one was very close to my home, because my parents, with my older brother, who's a famous glassblower, as a baby in arms, got the last train out of Prague in 1939. But the whole thing was so emotive to me to see those people stand up. And, yeah.
Paul Heine, in terms of the rest of your illustrious career, what part did That's Life play?
Being on That's Life is something that never quite leaves you. And I did 6 or 7 years on Watchdog until quite recently, which is, again, is consumer stories. And, you know, now and again, I just stopped and said, yeah, we'd have done that differently on That's Life, you know. It just stays with you.
Chris Earle.
I feel very fortunate and very privileged to have worked on this wonderful programme, and it's lovely having this reminder of all its achievements. And it also opened the door for me to have a lovely time doing presenting lots of other programmes and writing and all sorts of things that I wouldn't have done otherwise. So thank you, Esther.
Bill Buckley, from an early age?
Made my dream come true. I wanted to be a broadcaster, and I was 23. Completely untried, and I have done nothing but be a broadcaster for over 40 years, and it all hinges on that, and I am forever thankful for the life I have had, Esther.
Adrian Mills.
Well, apart from my mum and dad thinking I got the part on This Is Your Life, That's Life was extraordinary, purely by the fact that I remember about 20 years ago when a woman came up to me completely out of the blue, she said, "Your programme saved my son's life." I said, "Why was that?" She said, "You did a story on That's Life about safe playground surfaces. He fell off a banana slide. We all remember them in the 60s and 70s. Concrete surfaces. And Esther, the most simple demonstration, dropped a plate in the studio on a concrete surface. It shattered. Then dropped it onto a piece of rubber and it bounced. And she said, my son fell. He got a severe injury, very badly bruised, but he lived."